Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a time travel tour back to the very first major civilization of the Indian subcontinent, the Harappan Civilization. Honestly, the sheer scale and the level of sophistication of what these people built thousands of years ago is still baffling urban planners today. It's absolutely incredible.
Okay, let's dive into this. What if I told you that one of the most advanced ancient civilizations in human history was hiding right under our feet? It's pretty wild to think about, right? For centuries, people were literally walking over the remains of these meticulously planned Bronze Age metropolises, completely unaware of the vast, complex society buried right beneath their boots.
To truly wrap your head around the magnitude of what we're talking about, we have to look at this staggering number, 1,299,600. That is the area in square kilometers that the Harappan civilization covered. To put that into perspective for you, this single empire was larger than modern-day Pakistan. In fact, it was significantly larger than the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia combined.
If you trace its furthest borders out, this ancient giant forms a massive triangle. It stretches all the way from Sukha-Gandoor on the Makran coast in the far west, straight across to Alamgirpur in Uttar Pradesh to the east. It reaches as far north as Manda in Jammu, and drops all the way down south to Daimabad in Maharashtra. We're talking about a colossal territory that encompasses parts of modern-day India, Pakistan, and even Afghanistan. Here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. We'll be hitting the first great civilization, discovering the ancient cities, the timeline of Harappa, masterful ancient urban planning, monumental architecture and homes, and finally, agriculture, trade, and daily life. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The first great civilization.
So historians classify the Harappan culture as a proto-historic Bronze Age civilization. But what does proto-historic actually mean in plain English? Well, it means they were incredibly advanced. They had these highly developed urban centers, complex trade routes, and most importantly, they had a written script. But here's the catch. To this day, we still haven't been able to decipher it. Even so, they stand proudly as one of the 4 earliest civilizations of the world, right alongside the Egyptians on the Nile, the Mesopotamians between the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Chinese on the Huanghe River.
Section 2. Discovering the ancient cities. This wasn't some overnight revelation. It was more like a giant archaeological puzzle pieced together over nearly a century.
The story actually kicks off way back in 1826. A British traveler named Charles Merson just happened to notice a massive amount of old bricks lying around at Harappa. Decades later, in the 1850s, Alexander Cunningham, who's known as the father of Indian archaeology, went in and inspected the ruins. But the real game changer didn't happen until the 1920s. In 1921, Dayaram Sani began official excavations at Harappa, and literally just a year later, Rakul Das Banerjee discovered the majestic remains of Mohenjo-Daro. Suddenly, the whole world realized, wow, this wasn't just a few old bricks, it was an entire forgotten world. It was actually John Marshall who eventually coined the term Indus Valley Civilization to describe the whole shebang.
Section 3. The timeline of Harappa. Now that we know how it was uncovered, let's map out its lifespan.
Let's see how this whole society evolved and eventually declined. In the early phase, which kicks off around 3500 BC, we start seeing the very first hints of town planning, mostly basic mud structures and some elementary trade. But then we hit the mature phase in 2600 BC. This is for sure the golden era. We see fully developed towns built with durable, burnt bricks, and these rich, complex trade networks stretching out. Sadly though, by 1900 BC, the late phase sets in. Trade starts disappearing, and for reasons we're still debating, these magnificent cities are just slowly abandoned.
Section 4. Masterful ancient urban planning. If there's one thing that truly sets the Harappan civilization apart, it's their absolute obsession with organization. Just imagine walking into one of these standard Harappan cities. You'd notice an immediate, very deliberate division. Over on the western side, built up on these elevated mud brick platforms and totally surrounded by defensive walls, was the Acropolis, or the Citadel. This was likely the VIP hub for administration and rituals. Contrasting this, down on the eastern side was the lower town. This is where the general public lived, and it was laid out with mind-boggling precision using a super strict grid system.
When you look at the excavated ruins, you can actually see the remnants of that grid. The main roads crossed each other almost exactly at right angles, carving the city up into these perfect rectangular blocks. And get this, they didn't stop at just the streets.
They engineered an incredibly elaborate drainage system. Almost every single house had drains that emptied right into the street, all made of baked bricks. And the main street drains were actually covered with manholes, using bricks or stone slabs for regular cleaning. I mean, manholes. That's a level of civic engineering the rest of the world wouldn't see again for centuries. But, just as we think we have them all figured out, we find these fascinating anomalies. And this brilliantly illustrates that while the Harappans loved their rules, they weren't afraid to adapt. For instance, down in Lothal, there's no separate walled citadels. Instead, the whole town is just divided into 6 sections built on wide mud brick platforms. Dolavira? That one is uniquely divided into 3 distinct parts, not 2. Chenhudaro has 0 evidence of a citadel at all. And Benwali completely lacked the famous grid pattern in that systematic drainage we just talked about.
Section 5. Monumental Architecture and Homes. Let's get off the streets and step inside these structures.
Okay, so the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this ratio, 4 to 2 to 1. This isn't just some random set of numbers. It is the exact standardized ratio of length to width to height for their burnt bricks. Think about that for a second. Whether a brick was being made up in Harappa in the north or way down on Lothal in the south, literally hundreds of miles away, it adhered to this exact 4 to 2 to 1 mathematical ratio. This points to either an incredibly powerful centralized authority or a deeply ingrained cultural standard across this vast empire.
And they used those perfectly standardized bricks to build some truly massive public structures. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro was this monumental public tank, nearly 12 meters long. They ingeniously made it watertight by setting the bricks on edge and sealing the whole thing with gypsum mortar. They also built gigantic granaries, some stretching over 45 meters long, just to secure their food supply. But what about the regular, private homes? Well, they were designed with supreme privacy in mind. Houses centered around open courtyards had their own private wells, and fascinatingly, featured 0 windows on the ground-level walls, no peeking in. Even the main entrance was deliberately angled so you couldn't see directly into the interior from the street. Section 6. Agriculture, Trade, and Daily Life. Because obviously, a civilization of this scale couldn't survive on just bricks and baths alone. The Harappans were absolute master farmers and traders. Thanks to the incredibly fertile Indus alluvium, they produced massive agricultural surpluses. In fact, they were the earliest people in the entire world to produce cotton. The Greeks later called it Sindon, which is a word derived directly from Sindh. Over at Kalibangan, archaeologists actually found a plowed field with furrows cut at right angles to each other. This brilliantly suggests they were growing 2 different crops simultaneously. We've also found rice husks embedded in pottery at Lothal and highly advanced agricultural water reservoirs at Dolavira. Oh, and they also domesticated a ton of animals, from everyday dogs and cats to literal elephants down in Gujarat.
So, what does this all mean? We know how they meticulously built their cities. We know how they farmed, how they traded, and how they lived. Yet, we reach this profound, frustrating mystery. Through all of our excavations, we have recovered thousands of their seals, covered in this beautiful, elegant script. But we cannot read a single word of it. We are looking at the remnants of an incredibly brilliant society that is completely cut off from its own voice. What laws, what stories, what poetry might be locked away in those symbols? What else are they trying to tell us? That is the ultimate puzzle, waiting for the next generation of discoverers. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to keep questioning everything.